Welcome to The Bootloader. I'm Todd Kurt.
And I'm Paul Cutler. The show works like this. Todd and I have each brought 3 things to share, and we'll talk about each one for about 5 minutes. For detailed show notes and transcripts, visit thebootloader.net. Todd, what's your first one for us?
All right, so if you're in the U.S., there is a private company, well, really a collection of private companies, with 80,000 cameras splayed across the United States that track your car and you and sell that information to local police. And a synth YouTuber named Ben Jordan hacked them to show us how they work. If you're into synthesizers and watch YouTube like me, you may have heard of Ben Jordan. Around 8 years ago, he started doing music gear reviews, studio tips, music theory lesson vids. These videos were good, insightful, and had a bit of legitimacy coming from a professional recording artist. About 2 years ago, he stopped doing gear reviews because the synth gear industry has created a fairly toxic environment for these synth tubers, almost amounting to payola. So Ben just opted out. Nowadays, his videos still occasionally feature music production techniques, but he's also turned his eye towards wider aspect of his world, issues with AI, free software, hardware hacking. And most importantly, for the last 6 months, he's been working with security researchers and investigative journalists to look into these cameras and tracking systems made by a company called Flock. The first kind of these are cameras called ALPR, Automatic License Plate Recognition Systems. They blend into the various poles along the side of the road. The startup Flock, who makes the majority of them and license the data to law enforcement, claims they increase the number of arrests made and decrease crime. But as has been reported several times the last several years, these systems are rife with OCR errors because they've got they're built little machine language things and glitches that lead to arrests of random people having nothing to do with the crimes in question. And if you drive in the U.S., your car has been logged into this system. Like you don't even have a choice. Back in August of 2025, Ben posted a video that shows how just using a modern gaming GPU, you could crack the Wi-Fi WPA2 encryption of these cameras. But also the physical security of these cameras is a joke. If you have access to one, you can just pull it off the pole, really. You can easily pop out its internal micro SD card that contains unencrypted video it has recorded. So yeah, if you're a creep in a neighborhood, you can get access to all your neighbors' goings on. But more concerning is what Ben posted in November 2025 with the help of security researchers and journalists from 404 Media. There are these newer Flock safety cameras, that's capital Flock, capital safety. They were fully open and viewable from the IoT search engine Shodan. By the way, did you know that there's a search engine for IoT devices you can go to, and you can basically find various IoT things that are hooked up to the internet? So these Flock safety cameras are PTZ cameras, and they're designed to track people. They have built-in AI models to recognize and zoom in on people. They even zoom in enough to see what people are watching on their cell phones. And so he was able to just look at this stuff and see people using commercially available facial recognition software, public databases, and data breaches that's publicly available. He was able to identify several of these people that he saw, find their addresses, discover details about their finances, health, and family relations. I mean, what the hell? The most damning is after all these vulnerabilities were reported to Flock, they did nothing. So Ben went onto one of these publicly available cameras and read the official response from Flock saying there was no security problem as the creepy AI camera zoomed in on him reading it. It was kind of a beautiful example of the hack. And it wasn't even a hack. It was just going to a public website, searching and seeing public URLs. But thanks to his reporting, some police departments sold on Flock's promises have been canceling their contracts. So change is possible. I recommend that everyone go bug their city representatives and figure out if they're using these systems and get them to stop. From a privacy perspective, these things are bad that they exist at all. And from a technical perspective, as a hacker, as an engineer, having them implemented so poorly is just embarrassing. So let's get them turned off and put Flock and similar companies out of business. Links to all this stuff and all the reporting from 404 is in the show notes.
I've been a member of the EFF for about 20 years, and they've been covering Flock for a while. They've got a number of blog posts just over the last 6 months about how scary it is. And it's none of the government's business. And you can't tell me that Flock isn't selling this information sideways to data brokers as well as law enforcement. Yep. And we know that the federal government buys information from data brokers. Well, it's no one's business if someone's going to an abortion clinic, for example.
Yeah.
or, any kind of medical appointment. And it's pretty easy just using metadata like he did to figure out where people are going and what they're doing when you start cross-referencing the license plates with the facial recognition. And it's just scary.
Yeah, I mean, one of the examples he had was just he saw a couple come out of a Home Depot with a bunch of brand new fancy tools loaded up into their SUV. And he could then see what the license plate of the SUV is and find out where they lived. So he could go and get those brand new tools, if he was so inclined. Man, it's just like that Flock and the companies that use the Flock data are correlating all this video and AI detected information with other public data sets or even private data sets. And so it's just, let's try to knock this down a peg and make it not so easy for these people to do this sort of stuff. Anyway, Paul, what's your first one for this time?
I'm a sucker for a good mechanical keyboard going back to an old IBM replica I had 25 years ago. And I recently found out that my Code keyboard is no longer made as WASD Keyboards has gone out of business. I don't need a new keyboard, but I'm always window shopping, and the Naya Connect caught my eye. The Naya Connect is the second product launch from Naya, who has a Kickstarter campaign for their new modular keyboard, the Naya Connect. They previously launched their split keyboard also on Kickstarter. The Naya Connect features a low-profile keyboard that's ultra-thin at just under 15 millimeters. But what's innovative about it is that it's modular, allowing users to customize their keyboard layout and functionality. You can choose from different expansion modules, including a multi-pad, a 4x4 macro pad that can work as a number pad or anything you program it for, an extra column of 6 keys laid out vertically, 4 different input modules to let you replace your mouse, including a trackball, touchpad, a dial, and a floating joystick. And what's really neat about all of these modules is they're made for both right and left-handed users with connections for each module on either side. It also includes Naya Flow, their custom software that allows you to program your keyboard layout and all of the modules. If you're quick, you can jump on the Kickstarter as it has about a week left from when this episode is being released. Options start at about $180 and quickly go up from there depending on which modules you choose. One of the options was over $400, so you're paying for it, but it's still a discount from what they're going to charge from a retail price.
Yeah, there's one of the really cool things I love about this is their little mouse module, their input module, is one thing that has like a little round space in the middle and then 4 keys on the bottom. And that round space in the middle can be a touchpad area, or it can be a trackball, or it can be one of those sort of 6-dimensional sort of nubbins like you use in CAD programs, like the Space Mouse. And all those parts can be swapped. So you can have one sort of input module, but then you can swap out, I want to have a touchpad, I want to have a trackball. And it's just really clever.
Yeah, if you're using FreeCAD, you might want the space type joystick thing. I can't even describe it. And then you want a touchpad for your everyday use. And like you said, you just swap them in and out. And you can put them on either side of the keyboard.
Yeah,
So, which I think is
get
great.
One of each and put one on each side.
Right.
Yeah, a friend of mine is a real big believer of the. They've got the Mac Magic Trackpad thing, which is like a really big trackpad, and they have that on one side, and they have just a normal like fancy mouse on the other side, because doing some trackpaddy gestures are really natural, kind of like pinch and zoom and like moving windows around is really nice with the trackpad, and so I see them doing no keyboard things where they're just mouse and trackpad and they're really fast. So I think that's what I would do if I would get this keyboard.
Yeah, I use the Apple trackpad too, and it does make a lot of stuff easier, though. There's times where I wish I had a mouse for really detailed use, but I could go either way.
Totally.
What's your next one for us?
Okay, so very exciting news. The ESP32 finally supports 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi.
Yay!
Yeah. Everybody get your streamers. So if you don't know, ESP32 chips and the dev boards that have them are pretty much the best way to do Wi-Fi with microcontrollers, in my opinion. They're fast. They have lots of memory. They have a rich built-in set of peripherals for driving things like displays, doing audio I/O, buttons, all that kind of stuff. And you can program them either using the vendor-supplied ESP-IDF SDK, or you can use Arduino or MicroPython, CircuitPython. You can even use the really modern languages like Rust and Swift. But the term ESP32 is pretty misleading. It's not a description of a chip architecture. It's more like a brand, kind of like saying Ford for a car. There are multiple chip architectures in the ESP32 family, with the current, more modern one being the RISC-V based ones. And it used to be, if you were to say ESP32, you meant Wi-Fi microcontroller. But even now, that's not true because they recently announced an ESP32-P4 that doesn't even have Wi-Fi. It has a ton of GPIO. It seems to be really good at driving big displays, but it's not a Wi-Fi chip. In fact, their dev board ships with two ESP32s on it, this new P4 chip, and then like a ESP32C6 or something little Wi-Fi coprocessor, kind of like what Adafruit does with their airlift boards. The problem with all these different variations of the ESP32 Wi-Fi chips, though, is they've all been 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Even the most recently announced ESP32C6 chip that boasts Wi-Fi 6 support is still only on 2.4 gigahertz. This 2.4 gigahertz spectrum is the original one that the Wi-Fi was on. It's what like the old cordless cell phones are on. It's what Bluetooth is on. It's what your microwave oven is on. And it's still pretty good for Wi-Fi for longer distance stuff. But if you want higher data rates, then 5 gigahertz is pretty much the norm that everyone uses in their home and office setups. And it's to the point where a lot of Wi-Fi access points will encourage you to turn off the 2.4 gigahertz side of things. So some people have gotten home with their little ESP32 dev board trying to get on their local Wi-Fi, and they've not been able to because they've had their 2.4 gigahertz side of things turned off. But now there's the ESP32C5 chip. It's a dual band Wi-Fi 6 ESP32 that does both 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. And while both Espressif, who makes the ESP32, and Waveshare have had these larger dev boards, the sort of big for like testing out stuff, that use the ESP32C5, just recently, like 2 weeks ago, Seed has started selling a Zhao board with the ESP32C5. This is great. If you already have a Wi-Fi project using a QtPy or a Zhao, you might be able to just pop it out and swap in this new ESP32C5 Zhao to get your project on 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. And the other cool thing is that the ESP32C5 also supports Matter and Thread protocols. So I suspect we'll be seeing this chip and this Zhao board, and maybe Adafruit will make a QtPy version of it. And we'll be seeing those in a lot of home automation projects in the future. Links to the C Studio blog post about this in the show notes. And I can't wait to get one. They're currently sold out because I didn't get there fast enough.
Do you know if the C5, you can choose which band to use in software?
I think so. One of the really cool things about the ESP-IDF, which is the SDK that Espressif has written for their chips, is they cover all the chips. You just want to use one API, but they'll have different flags to specify things. And I'm pretty sure I saw in the ESP-init thing, there's this way to specify what band you want to be on. I do know you can tell what band you're on after you've connected, so there's that at least.
I was one of those users that when I first got into microcontrollers 4 or 5 years ago, I had 2.4 gigahertz turned off, and it took me probably a week to figure out why I couldn't get this thing on a network.
Yeah,
it drove me crazy. So I bet I'm not the only one out there.
Yeah. No, it's a harder problem. So I'm glad that hurdle has been overcome at least a little bit. All right, Paul. So what's your second one?
It's no secret that we're fans of CircuitPython and Adafruit products on the show. So let's take a moment and celebrate the Adafruit Fruit Jam. The Fruit Jam was first released at the end of July in 2025 and then went out to thousands of Adabox subscribers last November. If you haven't heard of the Fruit Jam, it's Adafruit's take on building a mini computer using the RP2350B microcontroller. With all the extra GPIO in the RP2350B, Adafruit was able to add DVI out using an HDMI port, 2 USB ports for USB hosts to hook up gamepads, mice, and keyboards, a micro SD card slot, and a Stemma QT port to add additional sensors, all in a size that's barely bigger than a credit card. This literally turned it into a microcomputer. Not only is the product innovative, I'm blown away by the community's response and all the cool software that is available to run on the Fruit Jam. First up is Fruit Jam OS. Once you have CircuitPython 10 installed on your Fruit Jam, you can install the OS like you would any other CircuitPython program. It includes a few games like Breakout, Minesweeper, and a Flappy Bird clone, an IRC client of all things, utility apps like PyPaint, a text editor, and Lars I/O Paint, which you can use to create MIDI music, and a couple screensavers like the Flying Toaster and the Matrix, and more. Sean Carolyn wrote a Pac-Man clone originally for the Seed Wio terminal, and Cooper Dalrymple ported it to work on the Fruit Jam and Fruit Jam OS. I never would have thought you could write Pac-Man in just CircuitPython, but that's what Sean did.
Yeah, it's really good too.
I'll be having Sean on a future episode of the CircuitPython show just to talk about Pac-Man. Speaking of Cooper, who is a CircuitPython community member, he's been doing a ton of stuff with the Fruit Jam and doing it behind the scenes. He was one of the first to create a game for it with Fruitress, a Tetris clone. He's also worked on gamepad support, a Fruit Jam store, and more things that I can list. Back in December, my last guest on the CircuitPython show was Dan Cogliano. Dan ported the Z Machine, the engine that runs Zork, to the Fruit Jam so you can play Zork 1 through 3 or other Z Machine games. He also has made a Moon Miner game, and he's working on a maze game that you'll be able to play on it as well. But where the Fruit Jam really shines is as an emulator. So many of the early computers have been ported to work with the Fruit Jam. Mac emulator? Check. It can run System 2.0 through System 7.5.5. Apple II emulator? Check. Intel 286? Check. But my favorite emulator is the Retro Jam by Frank Hodemakers. It's written in C using the Pico SDK and can emulate most 8-bit gaming system from the 80s, as well as my favorite 16-bit system, the Sega Genesis/Mega Drive. Supported emulators include the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Sega Game Gear and Master System, and the Nintendo Game Boy and Game Boy Color. It works with both a gamepad or a keyboard, which is wild. I would have never thought you could use a keyboard to play some of these old 8-bit games. It also includes the ability to save your games with some of the emulators. The Fruit Jam is only $40 and is available directly from Adafruit, though it's out of stock at the time of this recording. For $40, it really packs a punch.
Yeah, and if you want to play this kind of stuff right now and if you can't get a Fruit Jam, you can cobble together like most of the functionality of a Fruit Jam by using a RP2350 Feather and the TLV320 DAC and the RP2350 HST to DVI connector. Like you can basically like before the Fruit Jam existed, we were all trying to get this stuff to work by using these like 5 or 6 parts, and it's like they're actually pretty cheap to get it all assembled. So if you want to do it right now, you can still. Oh, also, for other cool, or I mean, like many of the things you listed are on the adafruit-playground.com site, and there's a lot of other really cool projects that are for Fruit Jam on there. If you just search for Fruit Jam. Like one of the ones that I've seen that I really liked is Sam Blenny. He's made a couple of MIDI projects that use, like, you plug in a USB MIDI device into the Fruit Jam and you can like use it to do stuff. But also he's created some like video test patterns and sort of video screensaver type things to help you sort of like learn how the Fruit Jam does video. And I found those very, very useful.
Yeah, both Sam and Cooper have really knocked it out of the park with all their community-driven programs that they've written for the Fruit Jam.
Totally.
What's your next one for us?
All right, neural networks in CircuitPython, native with native code. A few weeks ago, I came across a really interesting blog post by Ashish Patel on how to embed native code versions of trained TensorFlow or PyTorch models into CircuitPython. So if you're interested in machine learning or embedding native code into CircuitPython, this is a really useful read. TensorFlow and PyTorch are both Python-based machine learning tools for building neural networks and other learning models. Normally, these run on real computers, but we've seen TensorFlow models being run on embedded dev boards for several years now. In fact, Adafruit made an Edge badge version of their PyGamer board that could do TensorFlow-based voice recognition using TensorFlow Lite in Arduino. These models are trained on a large, fast computer, and then the resulting models exist as a blob of generated code with essentially a single function that takes an input and returns a result. But this code is small enough to run on microcontrollers. And there are several mechanisms for sticking them into your Arduino code or Rust code or Python code or whatever. But getting them into CircuitPython has been tricky. You can run a pure Python version of your model, and Ashish shows you how to do this, but that runs pretty slowly, as you might expect. But Ashish's blog post gives a step-by-step process, starting with the training of the model and converting the result into C using this tool called ONNX to C.exe or whatever. ONNX is the Open Neural Network Exchange, something I didn't know about. It's a standard way of representing machine learning models. Once you run this tool, you have a resulting C code that's just a bunch of tensor vectors, and no CircuitPython specific code in it. So the next step is to show how you can embed that C code into CircuitPython. And he does it in a way that's pretty clean and understandable. There's several little niggly details you need to do to make CircuitPython, the CircuitPython source tree, see your code to add your new native code that you're putting in there. It's more frustrating than just sticking your code in your board's definition directory, which is kind of what I would hope. But Ashish shows exactly how all that you need to do. So even if you're not interested in machine learning, but are interested in adding native code to CircuitPython, this post is pretty useful. It goes into much more detail than a gist I put up a couple of years ago. And I think it's actually more up to date because the way that CircuitPython is compiled kind of evolves over time. And so what I wrote in 2022 in a gist is probably out of date now. But yeah, thank you, Ashish, for that blog post. Super handy.
My partner is the smart one in the house. She's getting her doctorate in machine learning. So I read Ashish's article, and most of it went over my head, but she would probably understand it. But I need to reach out to Ashish because he needs to be on the CircuitPython show. What he's done is pretty cool. And the instructions do make sense because he does take you through it step by step. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so nicely embeddable, these little models, because they are literally just a single C function that takes one input and returns one output. So it's really handy, really useful. All right, Paul, what's your final one for this time?
I've been following on social media Washington State's proposed bill that basically adds DRM to all 3D printers so they can't print ghost guns.
Ooh.
On January 25th, Adafruit published a must-read blog post that has all the details and more. Washington State Representative Osman Salahuddin has proposed two bills. HB 2320 adds criminal liability around digital firearm manufacturing code and classifies the machines that make these parts as part of the firearms law. HB 2321 requires any 3D printer sold or transferred in Washington after July 1st, 2027 to include mandatory DRM that has blocking features that can detect a firearms blueprint. As Adafruit wrote and shared, printers would have to examine every file, compare it against a centrally maintained list of prohibited designs, reject flag jobs, and be engineered to resist bypass by users with significant technical skill, which is pretty much everyone who owns a 3D printer. While I'm all for gun control, this is just crazy. You can't outlaw the tools to create something just because it creates something you don't like. What's next? Outlawing drill presses and milling tools as well?
Exactly.
You can't tell me that people won't find a way around this. When it comes to DRM, they always do. What's stopping someone from adding a Raspberry Pi or a custom microcontroller and flashing Clipper on it, which is done all the time in the 3D printer community? DRM never works, and this is a terrible idea. If you live in Washington State, reach out to your elected representatives and tell them that this is a terrible idea. This is definitely something to keep an eye on because if one state is thinking about it, I bet others will be too. The language as it's proposed is way too broad, and I'll leave you with this quote from the Adafruit blog post. None of these controls stop determined actors. What they do is burden lawful users, destroy open source innovation, and force proprietary stacks and cloud services, not safety.
Yeah, it's so dumb. It's like this sort of stuff seems to pop up every couple of years, and it seems like every time I see the video of the little desktop mill, like not even a CNC mill, just a manual mill of like someone who can create a gun in a couple of hours just out of bar stock, and it's like, it's not the tools, man.
Right. We just don't need more DRM in the world.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, that's our show. Before we go, I'd like to take a moment. I live in the outer suburbs of Minneapolis, which is currently occupied by ICE. If you're looking for ideas on how you can help support those on the ground, please visit standwithminnesota.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay positive.